Hi, folks. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today, but I'm definitely excited to connect virtually. So, my name is Charlie Gliserman, and I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, and I am the Public Engagement Director at the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. The Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance is a coalition of stakeholders, different groups of people and individuals that are working together to advocate on behalf of young children and families at the State House. So we are made up of businesses, of other advocacy organizations, parents, concerned citizens, you name it, who are all working together for this common goal. And that looks a lot like organizing in the community. So, bringing people into our coalition and making sure that we really know, what children and families in Vermont need, and also taking that information and bringing it to the State House so that we can advocate and lobby to legislators to make sure that they are making the right decisions for Vermont's young children and families. So let me pull up these questions. So a brief description of what I do for work in my pathway to this job. So first, as the public engagement director, I do a couple different things. So I oftentimes am the public face of the organization. So I represent us in meetings, and a lot of my job is really building relationships with different groups of people, so that we can either exchange information, so that when we need someone to come into the State House and testify to speak with legislators, that I can call on them and they'll follow through. I'm a registered lobbyist. So January through May, when the legislature is meeting, I go to Montpelier. I'm from Burlington. I take the bus up to Montpelier, and I go to the State House and I watch kind of what legislators are doing in their committee meetings, and I talk with them on behalf of the Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance, and advocate for a couple different initiatives on what we call our legislative agenda, which is our list of policies that we're advocating for. And I can show you that a little later. My pathway to this job. So I graduated from the University of Vermont in 2017 with a degree in political science and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And after that, I got a job with a lobbying firm called the Necrassing Group. So they also work in the Vermont State House, and they contract out with different businesses and organizations to advocate for them, kind of similarly to what I do in my current job. I then went to New York City, and I worked at the Center for Reproductive Rights, doing fundraising and communications work for them. But I really missed being directly involved in policy and advocacy, and I missed Vermont. And so about a little over a year later, I moved back here and I started my current job with the Alliance. And so that's my pathway. It's, I think in a lot of career pathways, you take a couple turns, particularly when you're younger, you try things out, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And, it's okay to not have a totally linear path and not know exactly what you want to do when you're graduating from high school or college or graduate school. You can try and find your way the best you can. And I think it's really important for people to kind of keep in mind that they can make mistakes along the way and still have a really successful career. What do you like about your job? I really like working for a mission-based organization. So I come to my job and I know that everything I do is supporting this larger goal of making children and families' lives better in Vermont. And I think I'm really lucky because not all people have that. You know, whether you're working in the private sector or even in some government jobs, people either don't really feel a strong connection between the day-to-day that they do and kind of an overarching good goal of making the world a better place. And that's something that I really appreciate. I also really love, I love organizing in communities. I do a lot of different types of work. You know, I talk to legislators, I talk to early educators. It's not all kind of hanging out and building relationships and getting to know people and their daily lives. But that is a big part of it, because in order to be an advocate for folks at the State House, you need to know where they're coming from. So you need to, you know, meet people a couple different times and get to know them and their families and what they like about their jobs and what they don't, and what their vision is for you know, an early education infrastructure that's really supporting people. And so that's something that I really enjoy, just kind of the people aspect of the job. And, you know, I definitely love being in the State House too. It's really exciting. It feels like you're in a place where things are happening and things are really important. And so I also think I'm really lucky that I get to have both of these types of jobs, where I can go to a meeting in jeans at the family room in Burlington and hang out with some early educators and kiddos. You know, I don't do that too much during COVID or really at all, but prior to the pandemic, that was a big part of my job. And then I can also, you know, put on a suit and go chat with legislators. You know, no day is the same. And I really appreciate that variation too. So what's my next question? So what does a typical day look like for you? Well, so during the pandemic, my day has looked very similar to this. So I sit in this chair, I look at this computer screen, and I answer emails, and I go to meetings. And I think the most interesting part of this whole process of working during this pandemic is that, you know, the legislators usually meet obviously in person at the State House. And so with the pandemic, they weren't able to do that just because it's really, you know, crowded building, and, you know, there are a lot of folks that are at risk there. And so they've all been meeting virtually on Zoom. And so a lot of my job for the last couple months has been watching these meetings streamed live on YouTube, which has not been nearly as engaging as being in person and being able to talk with people more easily, you know, chat with them in the lunch line and stuff. But that's been a big part of my job over the last couple months. And a big part of my job outside of COVID, and I, you know, hope to be able to do this again soon, are those kind of site visits that I was talking about earlier, going to different communities in Vermont and building relationships with people, and seeing, you know, how the advocacy that we're doing at the State House translates to kind of the ground. So I think one really good example of that is that one initiative that's on our legislative agenda, this kind of list of policy priorities that we have, is called Universal School Meals. You know, advocating that every child and youth in Vermont, regardless of their income, is able to get meals for free at school. And there are plenty of schools in Vermont that have access to this, that have universal school meal programs through a federal government program. But there are a lot of schools in Vermont that aren't eligible for it as well. And so we want every school in Vermont to have access to universal school meals. And so we're chatting about these initiatives at the State House, but when, you know, I was having difficulty kind of picturing, like, what does it look like when, like, every child has access to school meals? Do they like the school meals? Does it change the dynamics in the cafeteria? Does it make it so that more teachers are eating the meals? Like, how does it really change the day-to-day? Because I think those details are really important. And so I drove down, I think, to Brattleboro, and I went to a school that has universal school meals. And I ate lunch with some kiddos there and chatted with the director of their school nutrition program, and really saw firsthand how kids were really enjoying what they were eating, and how more kids were eating the healthy food that they were getting from their school cafeteria, and that was, you know, nourishing their brains and bodies. And how a lot of teachers, you know, spoke to me about how universal school meals was so important, because there were kids that were having difficulty concentrating in class because they weren't getting enough food and were hungry. And, you know, it's really difficult to, like, do a math problem when you're starving. And so universal school meals has eliminated that problem for them and made it so that their classes, you know, are better run, more successful. And so that's kind of one example of those kind of community site visits and relationship building sessions that I think are really beneficial in my job. So what's my next question? What might make a student a good fit for your line of work? That's a great question. And I think there are a lot of different ways to get to advocacy jobs. And so I don't think that it's necessarily like one type of student can do what I do. You know, I worked in direct sales in high school, selling Cutco knives. And I think that, you know, being able to, like, sell an idea to someone and being able to talk to people comfortably and kind of build a relationship that way, that was, you know, really necessary in sales jobs, I think translates really well to advocacy. I also think that it's really important that people who are advocating for specific issues or policies have some experience with them. You know, so for instance, my boss, Matt, he's the executive director of our organization, and his children and his experience with his family has really informed the work that he does at the State House. And so I also think that just lived experience is really important kind of qualification for jobs like this. And of course, you know, if you're a total policy nerd and you think what the legislature does is really cool, or you went to the State House and you really love it and you want to learn more, I think you might be a good fit too. And you know, I'll give my contact information to you all and hopefully come for a Q&A, because I would really like to chat about that more with you. So I think that's all I have to share with you for this afternoon, but it has been great, and I look forward to connecting more later. Enjoy the rest of your virtual career fair.